Hello class, so today we're going to be continuing in chapter 1 and we're talking about different sampling methods and then also what can go wrong. So when you think about sampling, the need for it is because it tends to be the case that populations are very, very large and it's not possible for you to actually collect data on the entire population. So that means a sample or a smaller portion of the population is necessary. So your goal when you're sampling is to create a group that's as representative of the population as it can be. Now there's no guarantee that you can have a sample that's going to create a representative group of the population, but there are some methods that you can choose that's going to get you as close to that goal as possible. So one type of sampling method that has the ability to get you a representative sample, or as close to as you can, is a simple random sample. So a simple random sample is going to randomly draw from the population. And when I say random, that doesn't refer to it being weird or odd or out of the ordinary. Random in statistics is indicating that everybody in the population has the same chance of being selected as the next person. So a lot of times the idea of drawing names out of a hat is used because that is truly random, where nobody inside the hat has a better chance of being selected or drawn out as the next person. So through a simple random sample, sometimes we have the capability of getting a representative group of the population. Another sampling method that is sometimes used is what's called a convenience sample. So convenience, just as it sounds, the sample is chosen based out of convenience. So let's say that I was interested in doing soil samples for the desert. If I were to use a convenience sample, I then would be trying to get to locations where I actually could access the soil. So in a desert, there may be areas that are really dense with cacti that I actually can't physically get to. And so I'm going to draw soil samples out of the desert based on the locations that I can actually access. So that would be called a convenience sample because I'm drawing or sampling from that population out of where I can actually access or conveniently get to. Now, those are just a taste of some of the sampling methods that are out there. There are actually many more. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how or ways that you could actually sample from a population. Next, we're going to talk about things that could actually go wrong. So in your study, you could have 3 different types of bias. So bias is when you have information that doesn't, as accurately as you want to, represent the population. So the first one that we're going to talk about is selection bias. So selection bias is just as it sounds. Something that you did in your selection process has created either an over or underrepresented group from your population. So one example of a selection bias would be like me going to a health club and asking 20 people who leave the health club, is exercise important to you? That's going to create a selection bias. Regardless of what my population is, that is going to have a very skewed perspective as to how important exercise is. Non-response bias is just as it sounds. Something about the way that you're sampling is going to give you a group that has no response, so no information. So one example of a non-response bias might be going door to door during working hours, Monday through Friday, trying to collect information from people. So there's going to be a group that is definitely not represented because they're not going to be there. So it would be people who are working. So if there were questions that I were asking that were different for working people versus people who are not working at that time, that's going to create non-response bias. So then the last one that we're going to talk about today is something called response bias, and that is just as it sounds. You do get information, but that information is inaccurate. So that could happen for a variety of reasons. So it could be because people are sensitive and they don't want to tell you. It could be that they actually don't know the answer, and it could be that they're actually making it up. So an example of response bias could be the question, how many calories do you consume? Now there's a lot of issues with that particular question. The first one that we could talk about is that people just don't know how many calories they consume, so they're going to guess, and that would create a certain amount of response bias. Another thing that you may have noticed about that question is that I didn't give a time frame. So if I say how many calories do you consume, I could perceive it as per meal, whereas you could perceive it as per day, and that could result in different information or response bias. A third reason that that question is particularly problematic is because maybe I consume so many calories that I'm embarrassed, so I would lie. So maybe I consumed 15,000 calories yesterday, and I didn't want you to know that, so I lied and I said 2,000 calories. So those are issues that, or that particular question, are creating a type of response bias because either I want to lie about it, I don't actually know the answer, or the question itself is vague. So that's looking at some sampling methods and then also what can go wrong in sampling.